Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Pro AV today. If you've watched this show at any point in time over the last couple of years, you've probably heard us talking about the digitization of AV, whether that's through software tools, whether that's companion pieces, whether that's full on digital platforms and things like that. And a lot of times, as a community that's relied traditionally on hardware, we can miss some of the things that come with that digitization, right? And one of the things that I wanted to spotlight today specifically is that UI and UX side. So the user experience, the user interactivity side. So I wanted to bring on someone today who has lived in that world, has done a lot of work in that world, but also has a number of different experiences that they can bring into the conversation. And that's Joe Wylezik over from Vincit. Joe, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I appreciate it. This is awesome.
Well, Joe, look, you and I had a chance to chat at NAB this year and talk a lot about some of the ways that not only manufacturers, but providers and suppliers have shifted towards this digitization, right? And I want to make a distinction kind of up front, especially when we're talking about companion pieces and tools and things like that in softwares. Most of the time, we're talking about custom pieces from the ground up, right? We're less talking about kind of off the shelf stuff, and there's a place for that, and there's a lot of opportunity there. But as we're having these conversations, I want to focus mostly on like that enterprise ground up side. So, from that perspective, Joe, talk about some of the ways that you've seen the conversation around UI and UX change specifically on that enterprise and more of that custom side.
I think where I like to sit, because of probably what I do on a day-to-day basis and how I interact with potential partners and whatnot, is the revenue. The customer, the consumer that drives that revenue, right, is the most valuable asset of a business in a sense. And that is where the UI and UX took off in this industry, and in technology, in the digital transformation, is that the user is so valuable and so important to acknowledge and to listen to and to accommodate, because that's what's going to end up being your streamlined source of revenue, right, at the end of the day. And when it comes to UI and UX, if it's not working well, if it's not what your user base is wanting, and it's not what your customer base is wanting and going, excited about and wanting to go through, then you're going to have a massive issue. You're going to see the things that you don't want to see as a business owner for your offering or for your services or for your products. So that's where we typically sit. That's typically where that UI UX has now turned into it being really one of the more important sections and most important areas of your software piece, because at the end of the day, they don't know jack squat about that back end. They don't know anything about the operating flow. They don't care about the code, right? At the end of the day, the person that's entering that information that we want to collect or providing us with that revenue that we're wanting, that's realistically the only thing they care about, the only thing they want.
Well, I love that you bring up that point, right? Obviously focusing on that end user and that really that revenue piece of the pie, I think is so important, right? Historically in the AV and integrated technology side, there's been this channel where a hardware manufacturer will go through a dealer, a distributor, through an installer, integrator, directly to the end user, right? So there's been a lot of insulation, and it's hard. Like I want to give them credit, right? A lot of the manufacturers, providers have tried really, really hard to go to the end users, but there is just so much natural insulation that happens that it almost has become challenging, right? But then you look at the broadcast industry specifically, who relies very heavily on specific viewers, specific end users, where their broadcast experiences, whether it be radio, broadcast TV, OTT, whatever, there is a direct feedback loop that happens from the platform and the provider and that end user. Talk about some of the ways that we can grab some expertise from that broadcast community, specifically about sourcing some of that feedback from the end user and actually creating platforms that are valuable for them.
Well, yeah, I mean, wow, that's great. I think there's tons of ways you can look at this. And I always, I'll always say here too, is like, I look at it in a simplified, direct and realistic viewpoint, right? And at the end of the day, those users, those consumers, they're just not there anymore. They're not doing it the way that they used to do it, right? Like people are not sitting in front of a news channel watching news anymore, right? Like people are not sitting in front of a 2-hour movie realistically anymore. They want to have that taste of freedom in all aspects, in a sense. So, I think where, broadcasting, as we see with OTT, and whatnot, is that, right? Is the freedom feeling that they're getting and they're wanting, right? And so being able to accommodate that, right, is what is going to continue to grow that consumer and that viewer rate and that listener rate. And, giving them more of that personal, do what you want. This is more for you specifically feel like. I'll just reference the good old Netflix, right? What's the first thing that shows up on your Netflix? Top picks for you, not for me, not for anyone else, not what. Yeah, and then there's 3 rows down. It's what's popular on Netflix, no doubt about it. But that first row is about you, and that's, I mean, in my experience with the clientele base and us having a small footprint in this broadcasting and media industry, that's where we're seeing, and that's where people are asking us to come in and partner with them specifically.
Yeah, and I love that you bring that up too, especially where someone like Netflix, who's a content provider, is far less insulated, right? So they can, whether it's gathering granular data, whether it's gathering information, they can actually be proactive and prescriptive, and that brings me kind of to my next point, which is driving value for the customer. And you kind of touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but we've fallen into this trap a little bit as an hardware AV broadcast technology community where we've tried to shoehorn digitization and digital tools into the conversation, sometimes at the peril of hardware functionality, right? I use this example on another one of my episodes where, I haven't purchased a pair of headphones in the last 5 years that doesn't make me download some kind of app to use them, right? And that's not actually a great user experience, but the reality is it does help unlock functions. But, from a UI and UX and creating value standpoint, talk about how, one of the things that actually drives a lot of these tools, the digital tools, the apps, whatever, is actually creating value for the end user and creating value for that person who's actually going to be using the tool.
Yeah, it comes down to where they want to be and what they want to do, and it's going to fall back into that. I want that personalization. I want that freedom. It's to be revolving around me, and I want it to accommodate my needs and wants, and I want it to do what I want it to do. And it's not about what it does for Ben or Joe. It's about what it does for that specific individual. And in a sense, broadcast and media has had a hard time with that because the way it was built, the way it was structured, it kind of moves so much faster than the technology industry immediately, especially when it first hit the ground running, right? And now it's doing the opposite, right? And so I think that's where we see businesses, and I will reference some of the people that we provide some of our solutions to, like a KCRW radio station, LA's largest, NPR station. One of NPR's largest stations currently is, they're not wanting to listen to that radio station as much anymore, right? They want to open it up on their phone, listen to what they want to listen to, interact with what matters to them, see the events that matter to them, because that's what keeps them listening. That's what keeps them engaged, and making it simple, streamlined, easy. I'll reference, in my opinion, one of the greatest products ever created, which is the Apple iPhone, right? I mean, think about the evolution of it. I mean, it really hasn't changed over the past 5 years. I mean, really hasn't. And that's the purpose of it, right? Because it's easy, it's simple, it's consistent. That's the benefit. But yeah, then you have your Androids, you have your, Googles, and you have your other devices and user interfaces and user experiences, and other people have those options. But over and over again, more and more people continuously are buying more and more iPhones, and they're really not changing that much, right? I mean, they do a small software update on a layout and in the actual experience of the software, and it's like groundbreaking. It's like headline groundbreaking, right? And it's like, nothing's really changed, just the way it looks, right? Like at the end of the day. So I think that's kind of where broadcasted media is now getting that feel and getting that urge to be like, okay, how do we get in front of them, or how do we accommodate their wants and needs instead of trying to broadcast and stream to a large amount of people and promote it in a large viewpoint? Instead, let's put it in front of Joe for what Joe wants, and let's put it in front of Ben for what Ben wants.
Well, I'm gonna stick on Apple for a second. I think that's a good analogy, and one of the things that you've seen Apple do that is trickling into our industry holistically now is accessibility, conversations around equity, things like that. And Apple really was one of the pioneers, especially from a UI and UX perspective, on things like adjustable text size, sorry, accessible audio, hearing devices, TTY functionality, things like that. How important are those accessibility features to end users these days? It's a conversation, look, that's worth having, but I'm curious, on a higher level, how much are end users actually demanding some of those accessible features?
Oh my gosh, it's like it's not so much even about the features anymore and the benefits, right? It's more about the accessibility, right? Like that you just referenced that. It's about being able to use it more efficiently and more consistently. It's not about it being really cool looking or really attractive. It's really about, how do I get from one task to another task, the easiest, most simplest way? How do I make this device interact with me and provide me the true value it needs to do and needs to perform on my day-to-day activities, my day-to-day basis, right? That could be for personal usage. That could be for work purposes. That could be for photography. That could be for podcasting. I mean, there's a lot of ways for you to structure your device and use your device. And I think what they approached it is, let's not try to make the phone maybe more appealing, but let's make it more accessible, like you're saying. And that's what we see on a day-to-day basis, is someone coming in and saying, I want to create this, I want to do this. And we'll have to sit back and say, but is that going to be accessible? Is that going to be truly valuable to your consumers and to your clientele base?
Yeah, that's a great point, especially as you talk about, tools like handoff and being able to replicate experiences from one screen to another. Those are conversations that are being had, especially when you're talking about in applications and work functions, making sure that people have access to the same tools, that there's equity across platforms, things like that. And, wanted to kind of step back a little bit and change the subject just a touch. As a community of largely technical people, we have a tendency to try and do things ourselves first, and that we've seen that kind of take place, especially in the digital design world, right? Where we're talking about not only website development, right? We're talking about app development, features, functionalities development, things like that, where we've done it. We've tried to accomplish it as a community by hiring internal, using subject matter experts, things like that. But, I wanted to talk a little bit about the value of actually bringing in a professional in a company, right? It's something that we're very familiar with from an installation and an integration and training side. But I think something that we're, as a community, naturally a little bit less reluctant to, because we think we might be able to do it internally. Talk about that battle a little bit between using an organization like Vincit, for example, or trying to do it internally.
Yeah, I mean, I always use this line in my day-to-day operations and conversation is, man, you're a professional at what you do, and I'm a professional at what I do. And there's no need for me to go in to try to be a professional at what you do outside of what I'm doing. And so where that goes to next is, why try to go and develop it on your own? Why try to go and create it on your own when you can leverage a resource and a partner like a Vincit, right? And take the time to use your ideas and your concepts and for instance, actually be told if they are reality or not, right? Before you go in and say, oh, I want to do all of this and have all of this. But once again, is it truly valuable for the business? Is it truly going to be something that's going to develop and generate what the main goal of the business is, right? And I mean, we all know what the main goal of every business is, but it really
I
comes
don't know
down
what
to
you're talking about. Have fun, right? That's the main goal.
Well, at least for me and you, that is right. But I think for the guys that sit at the on the boards, they want the dollar signs to continue to go up, right? So, and that's what it comes down to. I think we're going to create a consistent trend in these conversations, leading to that technology is that resource, right? And it actually has a massive impact in that. So instead of bringing it in house and hiring and finding, right? Go and seek and rely on the self-sustained, self-structured professionals at it, right? Over and over again, people will come to us and say, I love what you did here. I would love to do something like that for me. And it's like, exactly. And so I want to come to you for that advice. I want to come to you to hear what you did there. And more importantly, like how we see ourselves as a company, right? Because this industry is very large, right? This development and this custom, spectrum of software is very large in different vendors and options. But, we like to approach things in an agile way, right? And so, if you do go visit our website, or you do come in contact with me and you ask Joe, what do you do well? And it's like, well, what do you need to be done well, right? Because that's the value of custom software. And we're more of that trusted partner that can go and tell you exactly what we think something custom can do. And believe me, I sit on conversations all the time and say, to be transparent, there is an off-the-shelf solution that could be better for you right now. But if you want to take that next level, if you want to transition and have the accessibility and have the ownership of the software and have the ability to call me back in 3 months, maybe 6 months, or even 3 years later and say, let's open the doorway to that idea I had 3 years ago. That's where having someone that sits in this seat and sits in this industry and has these conversations is very valuable, as I come to you for the advice that you provide on a day-to-day basis, right? So that's kind of how I like to look at us and try to create the indifferent that we have in this marketplace.
Joe, it's funny. The reason I asked that question is because I'm guilty of doing the exact same thing where, I'll go to some off the shelf platform and I've tried to design OTT platforms and mobile apps. And at the end of the day, I just end up kind of falling flat on my face. And I consider myself someone that's pretty knowledgeable about a lot of the back end, tools and softwares of how these systems work. But the reality is having an expert come in and having a place that can come in and advise and worry about things like security, accessibility, UI, UX design, end user output, creating value, things like that is so impactful and so much more beneficial a lot of times than trying to do it in-house. But I want to give you the last word here, Joe. If you had a chance to pull out your magic crystal ball for the world of UX design in the next 5 to 10 years, what are some of the trends that you anticipate end users calling for?
How do I use AI in that experience, right? How do I use this machine learning conversation? How do I integrate maybe a chat GPT type of product? Or how do I take advantage of that and integrate that into a design or integrate that into an experience? Seems to be a very common trend right now. And I'll be honest with you, I'm tremendously shocked on how many people go down the alleyway of saying they are experts in this and saying they know. And at the end of the day, that's kind of the benefit of it, right? Is that, yeah, there is a lot of information about it and there's a lot of opinion about it, right? But it's more about coming back to what's going to work for your user interface, like what's going to work for your specific users, and how are they going to go and leverage that to do what you want them to do, right? I always say, if you notice something, in my opinion, right? We have Facebook, Instagram, we have TikTok now. They all kind of function the same, don't they? Right? And they all have the pretty consistent streamlined story. And I think I remember when Instagram changed their format to being more of that live feed reel effect. And everyone was like, whoa, what the heck? And now more people are using it than ever before, right? Because, and more importantly, they're going back and forth through all of these applications and services now, because they're consistently the same. So that's something you have to take into an account is, yes, if more people are using it, you're going to have to adapt to that. If more people are asking about it, you're going to have to adapt to that, especially in your in any specific industry, right? So it is the nature of this beast, you know. And I will cap it off by saying, like, you know, the user is the most important process of anything. And no matter what it comes down to, it is the most valuable portion of the business. So accommodating that and understanding that thoroughly and relying on someone that can help you do that is probably the most valuable thing when it comes to digital transformation.
Well, Joe, we appreciate you coming on the show today and giving our audience a high level kind of overview of some of the ways that they could leverage some of these best practices for end user functionality and some of these digital tools. And look, we hope to have you back on the show again soon, but I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ben.
And thank you for tuning in. Be sure to join us next time.